Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Good Morning Kenya. My name is Vivian Ndegwa. And right now we get into a conversation that is of so much importance. It is a very, very important conversation that should be had over and over again. Now, every single year from the 25th of November through to the 10th of December, we get to have 16 days of activism. It's a campaign against gender-based violence. And it is important because it is a campaign that aims at ensuring that the girl child is safe, where we try to speak against every vice that may come up or in the sense of gender-based violence or where the woman is being violated. And as we get to finish off with the 16 days, today being the last day, it is only right for us to culminate this 16 days of activism by having this conversation. And joining me on set on my immediate left is Dr. Grace Githaiga. She is the CEO, Kenya ICT Action Network. Welcome to the program, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
All right, and right next to Dr. Githaiga, we have Quinta Mbori. Quinta Mbori is the Executive Director, Association of Women, of Media Women in Kenya, rather. Welcome so much to the show.
Thank you, Vivian.
It's a pleasure to have you ladies on this show today for us to culminate this 16 days of activism by having this very needed conversation that, if you ask me, needs to be had over and over again, not just within the 16 days of activism. If I may begin by just getting to know from where you sit, what exactly is gender-based violence and what's the significance of us having these days of activism against gender-based violence?
I guess from me, I will focus more on technology-facilitated gender-based violence because that is what KICTANET has been working on for many years. And I would start by saying that technology-facilitated gender-based violence is that technology is an act of violence against individuals, but primarily women and girls that is perpetrated and is assisted or amplified through the use of technology or digital platforms. So you realize that right now Kenyans have embraced technology, and there is such a high rise of uptake in technology, and with that rise, we have started seeing more and more cases of attacks, especially on women and girls, and especially if they hold positions in society. If say you know, they are people who command leadership skills, they command respect. So you find that sometimes there is an attempt to attack them and then amplify that using social media and any other digital platforms.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. Maybe just to respond to your first question, gender-based violence is any form of violence that is meted upon anyone because of their gender. Yeah, so maybe I should also highlight that when you talk about gender, a lot of times there's an assumption that gender is equivalent to women. And I think we just need to debunk that myth that gender is actually, there's a whole spectrum of gender. We have male, we have female, and we have a lot of in between. So there are many forms of gender-based violence. They could be physical, they could be psychological, they could be economical. And now we are talking about technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Even sexual harassment is a form of gender-based violence. At the Association of Media Women in Kenya, which is the national outfit, the national face of all women in the media across all the 47 counties, we are very passionate about creating a safe space, not just for our members, but also for women in this country. We are currently implementing our strategic plan, and part of our thematic areas include sexual reproductive health and rights, which encompasses, you know, gender-based violence. As a matter of fact, we have a coalition of media partners called the Kenya Media Sector Working Group, which AMWIK, as we are popularly known, leads the gender committee to deliver to society a sexual harassment-free environment. We even have a model sexual harassment policy, which we are advancing and creating awareness and implementing in media houses in Kenya. The thing about gender-based violence, or sexual and gender-based violence, is that it keeps evolving. And therefore, with the digital evolution, we have also realized that the harassment that used to happen offline, unfortunately, has moved online. Now, with the movement to the online space, and as Dr. has mentioned here, technology evolves at the speed of lightning. So what we're experiencing now is more harm, especially affecting the women, not just in Kenya, but globally. We are talking about 50% of women who will have experienced technology-facilitated gender-based violence, beginning from the age of 14. So the statistics are shocking. Hence, probably the discussion that we are having around 16 days of gender-based, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, because we're talking about 1 in 3, those are global data, 1 in 3 women will have experienced gender-based violence by the time they're 18 years old. Now, 1 in 3, when you move to the technology, when you move to the space of technology, the numbers even go up. So this is a discussion that, as you've mentioned, rightfully mentioned, should form part of our daily agenda. It should not just be, you know, moved to December, but because we know that media, unfortunately, does not pay a lot of attention to issues around gender. So we have to set aside certain days to not just highlight the issues that are affecting women around the gender, but also to take stock. Where are we? Are we making any progress? What do we need to do in order to experience a society that is not talking about gender-based violence in the 21st century?
And still on that, on the technology-facilitated gender-based violence, yesterday we had the national conference on that, you know, and maybe just what should be done in order for us to try and curb that. You know, this is like, it's like a new territory. And as she said, it keeps evolving. So how do we go about it, especially for someone like you who is in tech? What should we look at in order for us to try and curb it now?
Yeah, we actually participated, Kiktanet participated in that as a panelist in the session that was looking at the impact of tech-based violence on elections and content moderation. And one of so there are several interventions that need to happen, and actually we are working on them. Now, with support, you know, because Kiktanet doesn't have its own money. We basically rely on support from our partners who are drawn either from the international partners or even businesses that are our members. So currently, with the support of the UK government, we are conducting research, and this research is on technology. We want to look at what are the policy gaps, what are the regulatory gaps, because we can't just be speaking without evidence. We need evidence. So in that sense, whatever gaps will be identified, then those are the ones that will be used for policy advocacy, so that we are saying we need regulation, we need laws in this. The other intervention that we are working on, we are mapping schools of journalism and schools of law to look at the curricula and see if technology-facilitated gender-based violence is actually being taught in criminal law. And the idea is to start pushing this from that you know, from that perspective, that you know, you are saying this is what needs to happen, and we need, as journalists come out from the, you know, as journalists come out from the schools of journalism, that this you know, this is an intervention that we need to make. The third intervention that we are working with is that we are part of the support from the UK government is to do digital skilling for young women, marginalized women, persons with disabilities, especially women from Busia and Mandera, before we open it up to the rest of the country. And what we are doing is that in that digital skilling, there's particular training on cyber hygiene. How do they keep safe online? How do they practice cyber hygiene, you know, in similar fashion like the way we did during COVID? You remember during COVID, nobody told us to wash our hands. It had become so normal. So we would get to a place, we would wash our hands, we would wear a mask, we would maintain social distance. So what we are saying is that we want people to start you know, practicing cyber hygiene. And in that also, because we are saying these are young women, and we've noticed young people are the ones who have really taken you know, uptick on digitalization. And we are saying they need to start that learning, that when you get an image of, say, Grace or Quinta here, who has been, you know, there's an image probably, and I keep saying, I don't know why women share their nudes when they're in love, because men don't. And you see that photo being exchanged, and you share it with your friends. You might think it is funny, but it is not funny. You are also participating in that violence. And so what has happened out of that is that there are issues of mental health. So we are finding that many young people are experiencing this. And so one of the interventions, again, that we have gotten support from the UK government is to look at, in level 5 hospitals, in this where people get mental health, do women, for example, report on tech facilitated violence? And if they do, what sort of interventions are there? If there are no interventions, then this is what we will be recommending. And we will be recommending that there needs to be policy that caters for this. There needs to be practice. There needs to have, you know, we need to have more people trained to address this, because what we have seen is that technology has actually brought in another level of mental health, and there are so many people suffering, sometimes suffering in silence, where we have seen women just checking out of social media. You know, our argument is that no one has a right to get you out of that space, because the Constitution provides for you to, you know, that freedom in our Bill of Rights, for you to associate, for you to express yourself, for you to choose, you know, where you want to be. And it also provides you for, you know, on your privacy. But even like the recent finance bill, we saw a lot of doxing, where information, numbers were shared of parliamentarians. And the sad thing is that when you talk, say, to members of parliament, ladies, they tell you, you know, what was shared with them. I think Millicent,
she talked about it.
About getting pictures of, you know, men sending, you know, their parts, and telling her, you know, they can excite her. I think Esther Passaris also talked about that, and she was like, you know, at least when you send one that, you know, can at least is, you know, is, and I think that was a very good way of responding. Again, that is an intervention. How do we train women, young women, to respond to such, so that they don't get out of these
spaces. To know
spaces.
how to stand up for themselves.
Yes, yes. Know? And I think I want to just highlight somebody like Betty Chalo. I think she has been very good in responding to that and just managing to stay on these spaces. So those are some of the interventions that we are doing. Okay. But for like this particular week, we also had engagements. We had one particular thing that stood out for me is this meeting. Again, we had the deputy ambassador, British High Commission, with 5 girls from Kiktanet who spoke about technology facilitated gender-based violence. Those were girls between the years of 19 to 24, and 5 girls from an organization called TICO that offers them safe spaces. And it was just a very honest sharing. And I'm telling you, it was moving because so many girls are going through that violence. They are sticking in relationships because they don't feel economically empowered to be on their own. Within those relationships, they've ended up having children, 2 children. Surely at 17 you have 2 children, and what actually emerged is that, one, we need multi-pronged approaches to this issue. So if an international organization is providing funding, to not just provide the money, but to also look at what other measures are necessary. For example, mental health, and also what needs to accompany these girls. So even if you train them, what next?
What's next after that? And now to you, Quinta, you know, as someone who's in the media industry, you know, as the media, we shape perspectives. So maybe what role do we play in this, you know, when you talk about gender-based violence, in terms of our reporting, how should we shape this perspective of gender-based violence in a way that we are not elevating it? Because sometimes we are culprits to elevating it because of how we report about it. Sometimes you victimize the victim, you know, in your way of reporting. So how should we go about reporting matters GBV?
Okay.
You know.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Let me just put a disclaimer before I respond to your question, that digital media, or the digital space, is actually an enabler, particularly for women in the media. It is an enabler, and it has supported a lot of us, women in the media, to advance our causes, to advance our brands. It's a space where a majority of us have found economic empowerment in form of content creation. We have YouTube millionaires, we have TikTok millionaires, women who have actually come up because the digital space is sort of creates a level playing field for everyone, comparatively to what happens in mainstream, where over time it's always been male dominated, and it becomes very difficult for women to grow, you know, up the career ladder. So the digital space offers a great opportunity and a great platform for women, and particularly women in the media. But at the same time, it's become a hotspot for abuse. A serious hotspot. As a matter of fact, at AMWIK, when we, on 25th of November, at the start of the 16 days of activism, we launched a research that focused on the TFGBV that affects women in public lives, in the limelight. So you're talking about women journalists, you're talking about politicians, women human rights defenders, lawyers. So all these people who are continually, you know, in the public space, doing whatever they do best, you know, working and supporting, you know, their causes. So maybe before I even respond to the role of media in terms of how we can come together to mitigate the effects of TFGBV, if you allow me to highlight just a few findings from that research, because it sort of like has a direct impact in the answer that I will give. Now, from that feedback, well, from the research findings, one thing that emerged was that 50% of the respondents said that they had been abused online by people who are strangers to them. So that 50% means that's a huge number, and that shows you how unsafe the online space is. The other thing that came out was that 40% of the respondents also thought that even though they thought TFGBV was wrong, they didn't think it was a crime. Yeah, so that speaks to the issue around awareness, you know, digital literacy, media literacy in terms of what TFGBV entails. And just borrowing closely from us a research that I know Dr. Grace also participated in, that showed that in this country, in Kenya, we experience 1,000 cyber threats per second.
1,000 per second?
Yes, 1,000 cyber threats per second. And then when you do the math, it's actually, it's a lot of threats. And it also shows a lot of increase over the, you know, what has happened over the past, over the year in terms of TFGBV. Now, why am I bringing these figures up? Because ultimately, the media has a role. As you've mentioned, we shape perception. We inform the public, because without the media, the public cannot make informed decisions. So the media has a role to the public. We really have to give out the right information. We have to report ethically. We have to report in a gender-sensitive way. We have to report in a manner that is focused on the survivors. The survivor-centered, victim-centered. Unfortunately, that is not what we have experienced. I can comfortably confirm that we had cases of femicide in this country earlier in the year, and up until I think November, we were still experiencing big numbers of femicide happening. Waking up every morning with, you know, women who have been murdered by their partners and their loved ones, and yet the focus was so much on victim shaming, victim blaming, and even how the framing of the stories was quite questionable. And we are challenging the media organizations. I mean, we have our code of ethics in the practice of journalism. For avoidance of doubt, you can go to the Media Council of Kenya website. You will find a guidebook on that platform that shows us how we're supposed to do our job. And it advocates for principles such as balance, privacy, protecting the victim, promoting gender-sensitive reporting, all of that. What happens when we experience gender-based violence? And that also speaks to the issue of capacity. Maybe we need to, as civil society organizations, as governments, as, you know, sympathizers of GBV and TFGBV, we need to think around building capacity of journalists and media practitioners in terms of, because nobody will teach you in the media training school on how to report, you know, sensitively. These are skills that more often than not you learn on the job. So strengthening and building capacity of journalists is one aspect that we can undertake as media organizations. And you know, other than you know, doing researches at the Association of Media Women in Kenya, the other thing we are very big on is strengthening capacity of journalists, strengthening capacity of women in the public space, politicians. As a matter of fact, we have recently conducted training on TFGBV for women journalists and also women human rights defenders. And this is something that we keep doing. We do it all the time because we are cognizant of the fact that the space where our members or women in the media are actually operating is not very safe for them. So we have to continually safeguard that space. So yes, we do researches. It's a big intervention plan for us and a strategy, because ultimately, just like Dr. Ari said, without research, then we would be speaking from a point of, we would be speaking from, no evidence. But when you have evidence, then we're able to know the weight of the matters that we are dealing with. So research is a big deal. Strengthening the capacity of the messenger. How do we safeguard, how do we capacity build the editors, for example? They are the gatekeepers. Do they know what gender sensitive reporting is? Do they know what TFGBV is? Do they know what femicide is? How do we report it? And how do we prioritize this to ensure that it is a continual agenda in our newsrooms? You don't have to wait until something happens. There's so much around sexual and gender-based violence, but more often than not, the media focuses on the bad news. We have gender champions. We have laws that some of them are working, not all of them are working. We have gender champions, we have regulations. There's so much that media can do in terms of just sustaining the reporting of sexual and gender-based violence instead of waiting for, you know, an incident such as femicide to happen, and then we have pictures of many women on the front page and asking, how long are we going to kill these women? I think we need to change our strategy. And another thing that AMWIK does is we also offer skills, we offer tools that are accessible to everyone. For example, I just brought to studio, this is one thing that we have, a tool is called the handbook, Digital Safety and Security Handbook. This is a hard copy, but we have a soft copy on our website. Anybody can go to www.amwik.org and download this, because it has so much information in terms of what digital safety and security is, what are the threats, what are some of the measures that you can take when you're a victim, you're a survivor. What are some of the helplines, for example? Which resources can you use to access? So these are some of the things that we believe that if we are able to work together as a society, then we'll be able to mitigate this
and change that narrative.
Exactly.
And by the way, before as we almost come to a close of this conversation, you know, time really runs fast. You know, when you talk about femicide, you know, there have been walks on femicide, you know, women just walking to just try and campaign against femicide. There's actually one that is supposed to happen today, actually. But when we talk about this, one thing that has been coming out, when people say protect your girls, people have been saying no, teach your boys. So where do we involve the men in this? How do we involve them in a way that this stops becoming a gender war and it's just a war against gender-based violence, you know? So where do they come in?
I think, just allow me to respond to that, but I wanted to just add to what Quinta has said as a very important intervention for journalists. You know, KICTANET in collaboration with International Association of Women in Radio and Television has a map that was developed by KICTANET, and journalists have been mapping from all over Africa, and we encourage Quinta, we even encourage AMWIK to also participate in that, mapping these cases wherever they happen. And the idea is to actually come up with a report on where it is prevalent and then what interventions are necessary. And in light of that, you know, there are actually very many cases, it's not just in Kenya. But in terms of the question that you have raised, one of the things that happens is that socialization must begin with our boys. So for example, I have a son and I have a daughter, and one of the things is that I have drawn the line. You, my son, has no right in this house to either think that you can slap your sister or you can be rude to your sister. You must stop that. If you notice the terms that are used to insult women, wacha umama, and then there's that big one, the one that starts with K, and you know, it's always being used with men. And I've always wondered, why do men use terms that personify women to, you know, to insult? And so in light of that, again, as part of the intervention, we are developing actually a lexicon, and lexicons different, one in Somali, one in Luya, part of the support that I talked to with the UK government, but we are also doing one in Kikuyu, in Luo, in Swahili. We're doing 6 languages already. We have commissioned people, and our learning is that actually you bring men into this conversation before you start writing them. And because they are so on the social media, they have all these Kikuyu groupings, the Luo groupings, the Luo space. you know, get them to discuss these terms and also start socializing them. Let them come up with those terms that they use, and then we're including them in that lexicon, which then we will be using even on the ground for people who don't speak English. And I think that's one of the areas. But we must start socializing our young men from when they are young. And even when you have a husband in the house, when they use those terms, please put a stop to that.
Your final words on the same as we finish.
Yeah, I think having male allies in this journey is a very big part and an important conversation that we need to have. In fact, media still has a role to play, you know, to bring those conversations to the fore. How do men discuss their gender vulnerabilities? How do we give them the opportunities and the space? For example, I know at AMWIK, one thing that we did is that we've had an engagement with men under a project where we brought them together to get for us to see things from their perspective in terms of mitigating sexual harassment in newsrooms. And some of the feedback that came from the discussions was actually good, because a lot of these things happen because of patriarchal attitudes. We grow up, you know, seeing things happen. We grow up seeing our fathers do certain things. And therefore, trying to dismantling those structures becomes a really difficult task. But when we have these conversations and we're able to empower them and we make them unlearn things that they learned before, and then we inject new information in terms of just creating, you know, awareness around, because gender equality is a human right. It is not a battle of the sexes. It is a human right. These men have daughters. These men have wives. They have sisters. So we are advocating for the rights of the people that they care for, the people that they love. But something happens when it comes to the relationship with their loved ones, with their spouses, because that is where we draw the line with their colleagues. So ultimately, it's just to approach it from a human rights perspective. Let us advocate for the right of everyone, whether they are men or female. Yes.
All right, that's a nice way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And as we said, this 16 days should not be the end of us talking about gender-based violence. This is something that should be talked about over and over again, and we'll keep creating time to just have such conversations so that we also get to create awareness on it. Thank you so much, Dr. Gedaiga. Thank you so much, Quinta, for joining us on this conversation. This is where we end this particular talk, but don't you go too far. Mike Megwe will be coming up next with a different topic. Stay tuned.